I don't want to be grouped with any other pool of candidates because I'm running as me, myself. I don't think that it's all about gender. Now, having said that, do I think we need more women in government? Yes, I do. We're 52% of Pennsylvania's population, and we have no females in Congress from Pennsylvania at all. So I think that we absolutely need to achieve equal representation, but I don't think, and I've never asked for anybody to vote for me based on my gender. I don't want them to. I want them to vote for me based on my qualifications. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Boy, Pastor, 3 men in a row. You're not doing your job. I can keep it. I want to know, as specific as you can, make plans to address the scourge of sexual assault, rape, and other heinous acts that plague mostly women. 90%, over 90% are women. And as a survivor of sexual assault, I very much related to Dr. Ford and the testimony, and I know what it's like to be able to relive all these details in horrid memories. And even the GOP, if you want to look at it in a purely Machiavellian way, rape costs more than any other crime in the United States. Each year, it's $125 billion. That's the cost of rape. And people who grow up, I grew up in Connecticut, prep schools and all, like Judge Kavanaugh and his friends. And I know the privilege that they feel. And I'll tell you, every rape begins with this sexual assault, this fooling around, the gaining the sense of entitlement and empowerment over women. And it's fallen on a hypocritical ear of Trump when he came out right after that. She's a hoax. She's part of a hoax. Let's call them all women who end up coming.
Well, let me just say this. I think that anyone with a grievance, particularly one of sexual assault or any type of attack like that, should have an opportunity to be heard, and that we as a society must listen and give them that opportunity without judging and without without being hypocritical. I think that the circumstances of every case are different. I don't by any means want to suggest for a second that the Kavanaugh proceeding reflects our society as a whole and our values, because I don't believe it does. But I do think that for far too long, for decades and decades, women have been afraid to come forward, and unfortunately, I don't think that those proceedings were the best example of our government at work. And I think if anything, those proceedings probably discouraged a lot of women from coming forward. But more than that, I think that the entire proceedings on both sides was not, as I said, not an example, was not our finest hour as a government.
Yes, I have a question about the Head Start program.
Wait, you didn't answer the question.
The question?
The question was, what, if any, plans do you have to do legislatively to address that?
Well, there are many things that we need to do. I mean, there are things that happen on college campuses, there are things that happen, and I can't answer a specific legislative measure. I can tell you that we need to do everything that we can within our power to encourage people to feel, so that, and to hear people.
This whole thing was a mockery. You know, not your answer.
As I said, I don't think it was by no means our finest hour, and there's no question about that.
I have a question about the Head Start program.
Yes.
I believe you're an advocate of
I am.
the Head Start, where children 3 to 5 start school that early. Now, it takes $375 to $1,100 a month to educate a child in the Head Start program. According to the Wall Street Journal, by the time that child reaches the 3rd grade, any initial advantage that child had because of the Head Start program has totally disappeared. You cannot distinguish the child who had Head Start from the one who didn't. This sounds like a very expensive program with no final return on investment, as that initial advantage disappears rather rapidly. What do you have to say about that?
Sir, I can't quote the numbers the way you just did. I haven't read that article or study, but I will say this. I think we absolutely have to educate and provide opportunities for our young. There are definitely studies that show that children who have had the benefit of early preschool do better in school overall.
Until the 3rd grade.
I haven't seen that, sir. Where is that from?
Wall Street Journal.
Ma'am?
Yes. If elected, what would you do to learn the will of the people on specific issues?
So one of the things that I have said on multiple occasions is that I would have frequent, open town halls in person, not telephone, not by Skype, not an online kind of thing, but that I would actually have live town halls on at least every 6-week basis in different parts of the district, because as you know, this is a very large district going from western Lehigh County up to Stroudsburg. And I think it's important that the location is varied a lot so that different people get out to talk to you at different times. That's the main thing. I also would have, as most elected officials do, constituent outreach people on my staff who would actually be people that would reach out to the community, as well as be people, staff members that members of the community could reach to. But I would hire them very deliberately with an eye towards having them represent different segments of the population, meaning a more diverse staff.
Do you feel that the constituents do have valid reasons that you need to listen to them and what they think?
Absolutely.
Repeat that.
Okay, the question was, do I believe the constituents have valid concerns or issues? It was something along those lines?
Yes, and that we should expect that you would really listen to
And that we
us.
should expect that the elected official would really listen, and the answer is absolutely. It's not called the House of Representatives for nothing. An elected member of Congress is supposed to represent the people who voted that member of Congress in, and the only way you can represent them is by hearing them and listening to them.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm a retired school teacher who taught in the South Bronx. And
I never would have known.
Okay. And I also have a master's in the teaching of reading. And I would have to really look at the methodology of that study. I really question it. I see when students enter kindergarten or when they are in 1st grade, because I've taught both grades, I've seen that they benefit from it. And once they've learned how to read, it improves them throughout their schooling. So I am in favor of Head Start. And I also want to say that within the last couple of days, I read that you are endorsed by the American Federation of Teachers.
That's correct.
And I am glad to say that you are endorsed by us.
Thank you. Last night I had a round table of teachers at my campaign office, about 15 teachers from all different school districts and a charter school representative and a parochial school representative. And I listened to their concerns, much as you asked whether I would listen to constituents' concerns. And almost to a person, they talked about the fact that so many of, particularly in the Hellertown school district, that so many of the children are getting to kindergarten and first grade wholly unprepared to learn. So thank you for mentioning my endorsement from the teachers.
Since we're on education, I'm a school counselor in Hellertown School District as well, and I was wondering what you thought about the funding of public education, and if there's any movement towards correcting the balance of funding for the charter schools. As you may have heard last night, the way the charter schools are funded in Pennsylvania, I'm not sure if it's quite the same in all the other states, but it's bankrupting, literally, the Hellertown School District. And so the funding for the public school children is going down, where the charter schools are getting a lot more benefit, and seems to be unfair. I was just wondering what you thought about that.
Well, I believe very strongly that every child should get a quality public school education regardless of the zip code they live in. And the disparate education that they receive in different school districts is of great concern. I have been told exactly what you just said by a number of administrators in Bethlehem, Easton, and Allentown school districts, that the charter schools are siphoning off a lot of the public school dollars. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution to education, and I understand that some charter schools have a real place in our educational system. My concern is that there are so many of them, and so many that aren't held accountable and have no transparency, and I'm very concerned about the large outflow of dollars from school districts like Allentown, which of course is a distressed school district and is suffering because of the large number of charter schools within the district.
Susan,
yes.
Thanks for coming tonight. We appreciate it.
One
of the things that comes up a lot, and I guess it was a topic last night by reading the front page of the Morning Call this morning, the influence of money in politics. And that goes to special interests, PACs, corporate involvement. Could you just talk to us a little bit about that? Because I think it really rattles a lot of people's cages. And, you know, there's a dimension we've seen on 60 Minutes, and that's the amount of time that congressmen or representatives have to spend raising money. So, you know, could you enlighten us a little bit what your position is?
As somebody who's been on the campaign trail for more than a year, I think it's 372 days or something today, I can tell you that nothing would make me happier than to see genuine campaign finance reform. I think if anybody had really laid out for me before I got into this just how much money you're expected to raise and how you have to go about doing it, I probably would have taken a pass. I've signed a pledge. If you're familiar with the Supreme Court case Citizens United, which allowed corporations and dark money into the political system in a big way. I was endorsed by End Citizens United, which is an organization dedicated to campaign finance reform, and I've signed a pledge, as have a number of candidates across the country, that campaign finance reform would be our very first priority. And the reason I think it's so important is not only because it dissuades good people from ever getting into politics because they get told what I wasn't told initially, but that's not really true. I was told I had to raise a lot of money, I just didn't realize quite how much. But also because it affects, I mentioned in my prepared remarks that as a lawyer I was always taught to avoid a conflict of interest. You know, we can't take a client who's got a matter adverse to another one of our clients. Well, it's the same kind of thing except that for some reason politicians aren't held to that standard. And so a politician may take money from Big Pharma and then be voting on a prescription drug bill. And that's the reason that I made a pledge early on that I wouldn't take corporate PAC money, because I don't feel like, I think it defies human nature to think that you can go be an independent voice if you're taking money from the same industries that you're then being asked to vote on. So I think campaign finance reform absolutely has to be at the top of the list of priorities.
Hi, I'm just happy for your comment before that gentleman spoke when you made the comment that the purpose of the job of representative is to represent the people who elected them to office. And I'm happy for that comment because too many are not doing that. They're representing special interests. So I'm happy that you recognize that, and I'm happy for your comment.
Excuse me. I want to revisit the question that gentleman raised about money in politics. I mean, I think everybody in this room knows that the people that really run Congress are the corporations, Wall Street, the billionaires, and yet I'm on the email list for DNC, the DCCC, the D whatever, and a couple others affiliated PACs. They sent out, the DCCC sent out a questionnaire one time, says, we want to know your views. And one of the questions, what is important to you? And they had a whole list of items, I'd say about 8 items, and I was down the line, check up. I was down the line, yeah, yes. We're missing something here. They made the mistake underneath their 8 or 10 items, whatever it was, of having fill in the blank. I said, what something expletive deleted don't you people get about the corrupting effect of money in politics? They did not have it in their list. You talk about being angry. You can see, my blood pressure's coming up here. That's what's wrong with our government.
I don't disagree.
And you've got people down there, you're going to have to try and work with them, that they don't understand that's a problem. Excuse me, I'm a blue-collar guy, retired blue-collar guy. I got paid by an employer for doing my job. When they get paid by corporations and Wall Street and billionaires, who the heck are they responsible to?
Well,
it's disgusting. They're destroying our country. I'm sorry.
That's okay. One of the other problems is that far too many members of Congress and elected officials leave and then become lobbyists, corporate lobbyists.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's shameful. I've taken a pledge I will never become a corporate lobbyist. I have no interest in going in sacrificing my ideals and then going to work for as a lobbyist of Congress. I think it's inconsistent. I don't think members of Congress should be allowed to become lobbyists after their time.
Hello.
Hi.
There's a disconnect about the education issues that I'm wondering about and how it can be solved, because the states do control how the education is run in that state. How can someone who's in your shoes at that higher level influence what happens when it's up to the state to make the decisions about the education of the children?
You are correct that most dollars in public education are allocated at the state level. There are, however, federal programs that feed directly into the education issue. That's all I'm referring to. But you're absolutely right, yes, that most education issues, public schools throughout the state of Pennsylvania, most, not all, but most of the money comes from property taxes.
And the problem is that you can't do a thing about that.
That's correct. There are other educational programs, though, that we can.
Hello again.
Hello.
Speaking of financing, where are your main sources of finance? And you talked about billionaires and millionaires, but it seems on the Democratic side there's Emily's List, there's George Soros, there's Tom Steyer, and they're all big donors to the Democrat side, not the Republican side. Do you receive money from, they aren't corporations, but they have a lot of billions of money. So where does your money come from?
As of the last time I checked, which was very recently, we had more than 10,000 contributors, and our average contribution was under $100. So, have I received money from some very rich people also? Yes, I guess I say thankfully because of the vast amount of money we have to raise, but the average contribution to my race has been under $100.
You were endorsed by Emily.
Yes, I was endorsed by Emily.
They don't give you any money?
Pardon me?
They don't give you any money?
No, they serve as a conduit for people who want to contribute to women candidates. Hi.
This is probably a sore subject, but I'd like to know how you feel about the current gun control issues in this country. Where do you stand?
I'm glad you asked that, because a lot of people seem to mistake, pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, how do I feel about the subject of guns and gun regulation and that kind of thing? I'm glad you asked the question because people often mistake Democrats for being people that want to take away your guns. I have no interest in doing that. I'm here to tell you right now, I have no interest in doing that. I'm a believer in the Constitution in its entirety and every amendment to it, the Second Amendment included. My father and grandfather were hunters. I have no problem with people who want to own guns for self-defense, for hunting, or anything else. I just want to see us get guns out of the wrong hands, and it's pretty clear that we've got guns in the wrong hands in many cases. That's my only issue. I do think we should have universal background checks. But to my understanding, about 95% of Americans feel the same way, including a majority of NRA members.
Who didn't speak? Male who didn't speak? Who spoke? Everyone spoke.
As far as I know, they expect to fund Social Security with the money that people pay Social Security tax, right? But they say that there's not enough workers nowadays to provide the money to provide Social Security to all the baby boomers. So they say that there's going to come a time when there won't be enough money to have to cut our benefits or do something. How do you feel about using regular income tax revenues to support Social Security?
Well, there are a lot of other programs that income tax revenues are also supporting. I am honestly in favor of raising the wage limit on Social Security so that people pay the same rate of Social Security up to the full extent of their income, because I think that's one way that we could supplement the Social Security budget. And unfortunately, I think income taxes are being used for a whole lot of other things, not all of which are great programs, but I don't know if that's the way to solve the Social Security problem.
Or wait, female didn't speak.
Thank you. I want to get back to the gun issue.
Closer.
Closer? I was reading about your stance on different issues on your website, and I think we're all wanting better gun control. But my question is, do you believe that mental health issues or the lack of facilities, the lack of funds, play into the fact that we have so many problems there and with the opioid crisis? And I'm just wondering how you would work to improve safety with guns and by implementation with better care for those who have mental challenges.
So the question had to do with mental health care specifically as it bears on gun issues, as I understand it. I think overall we're not doing a terribly good job with mental health care in this country. And that crosses all kinds of areas, veterans and people who obviously, people who go up and shoot up a school or a movie theater have some mental health issues. And I'm not suggesting that we can pick out every single one of them, but I do believe that background checks would be helpful. I do think that we have to really mental health issues have a stigma in this country, that people are afraid to actually, there are red flag laws that have been talked about as a means of tagging people who may be dangerous. And I think that we have to be very careful and very proactive about making sure that mental health issues are treated with the same degree of respect and research and honestly funding as physical health issues.
Because I'm just thinking Allentown State recently closed. You see more closures, and I think it's being put in the community. I'm just wondering how you would combat that to improve. I think that's where a lot of the problems come from, that we don't have, there is a stigma and we don't have the ability to help those people in a meaningful way.
Well, it's a big issue. It's a growing issue. Anybody who's got private insurance knows that mental health care is always reimbursed at a completely different rate than your physical health care. That to me is a problem, right? Because we know that people have mental illnesses. We need to deal with it. We need to appropriately, it needs to be an integral part of whatever healthcare reform we implement, whether it's the Affordable Care Act or something else. I feel very strongly about that because it's affecting children in our schools. The teachers I spoke with last night talked about children who are literally suffering from adverse conditions at home, a parent in jail, homelessness, hunger, and they have actual manifestations of mental illness as a result. So it's not just about shooters, it's about children, it's about people in our neighborhoods, it's about people in our families.
Just another follow-up on gun control. Do you see it as a federal issue to ban assault weapons and high-capacity cartridges and bump stock?
Yes, I do.
I wanted to respond about the Head Start. I'm glad that you talked about, just now you dropped in, something about young children coming from homes with perhaps parents in jail and different circumstances. Certainly the children that are eligible for Head Start are coming from different backgrounds, a lot of teen parents. So what they actually do, it's actually an education program, but it's also health and nutrition that they support, and they will help families get clothing, they will help the parents get jobs, they can give them all kinds of community resources. So in the Wall Street Journal article that you read, sir, you may have misread it or it was misleading, because when you say that a third grader is at the same level as a Head Start child, and then you're actually looking at it from a perspective where without Head Start, that child may have been behind and not isolated for any kind of emotional stress because of their family situation. And so when you said about, that children also they will get the help that they need early on, and we know that if someone has emotional problems, does not seek help or get help early on, then it can manifest into some of the larger crimes that we're looking at, especially the shootings. It tends to be a certain type of person, and definitely with mental health issues. So, about mental health, what are the kinds of things that you can hopefully legislate help with writing to even out there's such a, either you have this kind of insurance or you have no insurance that's going to cover, especially for addiction and mental health.
I think mental health care has to be part of a comprehensive health reform package. It cannot be put aside, and that includes, by the way, treatment for opioid addiction, which, is another thing that until it happens in someone's family, everybody's able to sort of set it aside. But we know that it crosses party lines, it crosses demographic lines, and it very much is part of the whole mental health issue. But we also have to acknowledge that a lot of people across the country have chronic pain conditions, which is what got many of them in that situation in the first place. But I think I think mental health in general has to be part of an overall reform of our healthcare system. I really do. And just to circle back on the issue of children, I think that, unfortunately, I don't think we pay enough attention to the fact that the children are our future, and that just because somebody was born into poverty or into a family where a parent or both parents ended up in jail or with drug addiction, I don't think we should give up on those children. I think that by doing that, we sacrifice our future economy, we sacrifice the future safety of this country. So I really feel strongly that children deserve equal treatment regardless of the circumstances of their individual family unit.
Thank you for coming, and
my pleasure.
I certainly appreciate all of the issues that are being discussed, and I think they're extremely important. But I want us to take a step back. You said we need to vote our values, and Pastor Phil said we need to vote our faith. And I'm wondering whether we haven't been voting our values and our faith, if you just look at the last election, for example. So there's got to be another reason that this is happening the way it is. And I guess one of the reasons is that people don't vote. It's one reason. The other reason is that they don't understand their own values or their own faith. Can you imagine a way that a society as big as the United States could begin to change that in some way? Or is it inevitable that that's what's going to happen?
The issue of more people voting, or the issue of people and their faith and values?
No, I'm talking about changing their faith and values, or interpreting their faith and values in a different way.
I don't think elected officials are able to or should be affecting people's faith and values. I think that's something that is learned at home. I think that's where the most influence is over all of us. You know, I don't think an elected official can tell you to think or act a certain way. I think that's something that's really closer to home.
Yeah, I didn't imply that. I didn't mean to imply that you would be doing that. I'm talking about us as a society. Is there something that you see that we could do that's separate from electing officials, that would help people either to understand the issues better or to interpret their own faith and their own values better, or even to change values? And I don't mean that the government should change the values.
It's a great question. I think it might fit into what the pastor's wants to talk about at the end. I don't know the answer to that. I really candidly don't know the answer to that. There are a lot of things that I see people do that I wish we as a society could change. Hate speech, that kind of thing. But it's a very challenging thing in a free country.
I would just add that I think one of the issues from the faith perspective is that what are we intentionally and consciously passing down to future generations? Or are we just absent of that because we're so busy and we're so individualized that there's a generation being raised that just doesn't really care what we're passing down in a real conscious, intentional way. That's a faith issue.
Welcome, and thank you for coming. I finally got a question. It's been growing, everybody's been helping me with getting my question. As I think about third graders, and I think about third graders of color, boys, I think about the prison system, and I think about criminal justice. You know, what can you do? What do you think about doing to change the criminal justice system that we see has gone awry? And the big bucks, you know, the private prisons for young black men. You know, I mean, what can you do about that?
Well, first of all, I don't believe in privatized prisons. I don't believe that we should have a profit motive involved with our prisons. And it's not just about black men, although that's part of it. It's also about youth and that kind of thing. I think we have to bring an end to mass incarceration, which we've got more people in prison now than we've ever had in our history. And many of them are there in situations where they would be better off in some sort of rehabilitation facility than they would be in prison, where I worry that there are far too many people that are hardened by the system. I think that the war on drugs was a failed war, and it ended up with an awful lot of people in jail who shouldn't be. So there are a lot of steps that our criminal justice system needs to take. I think we need to get back to community policing. I think we need police forces that reflect the population of where they actually are, meaning that they look like the population that they are part of, both so that they can serve as role models and also because of concerns about discriminatory action.
Yeah, Susan, one of the things we haven't really addressed tonight is immigration, and I think, there's been an issue for 20 years that the government cannot legislate a solution that would work, and both parties have had the opportunities, and it hasn't gone anywhere. Now we've got this highly emotional response from the wall to kids getting separated from their parents and whatnot. How would you suggest Congress approach resolving this once and for all? Because it just can't go on forever.
Well, I agree with you, it can't go on forever. I also agree with you that it's completely broken. I think that there really has to be a comprehensive overhaul of our immigration system that takes into consideration that we are a nation of immigrants, but at the same time protects our borders and recognizes the sanctity of this country. I do believe in a humane immigration system, but I don't believe in open borders. I do believe that we need security, and I think that it absolutely has to be. This should be a bipartisan issue. This should be something that people across the aisle can agree on and work on, and I would very much like to be a part of that. I don't think there are any magic answers. But I think that we know that there are some policies that are dead wrong, and that there are also problems. I mean, I read today, I guess, that Arizona cannot keep up with what's happening because they have so many people coming across the border. It's a very, very difficult issue. People for generations have wanted to move to this country to better themselves. I think we need to respect that, but at the same time, we do need legitimate immigration controls that are humane.
All right, here.
Hello.
Hi.
I don't know whose idea this was, if it was yours or the pastor's, but I think it's great that you're doing the town hall tonight.
Thank you.
And also would want to continue that if you were elected. I came in where you talked about that you want to serve on the committee infrastructure if you're lucky to be elected in November. Can you talk about the other priorities that you would have for this district in your first 2 years if you are elected that you would work to bring to fruition?
Well, my second favorite committee would be education and workforce, because I think and workforce in particular. Those are really the two things that I feel most strongly about. I think that the economic prosperity of this district is vital. And I think that with economic prosperity, we can solve a lot of other problems. But we've got too many people who are working 2 and 3 jobs to get by, to pay their bills, to pay their health care. I also consider health care to be right at the top of the list of my priorities and the things I'm most passionate about. But I think that we've got stagnant wages. I know that we've got people talk about our growing economy and the stock market doing great until, I guess, today when it took a nosedive. But the problem is that there are an awful lot of people I talk to in this district. Most of the people I talk to are not in a position to invest in the stock market. They are literally struggling to pay their bills, and that to me is my first and foremost concern.
to do with the state issue versus the federal government issue. If a prison is in a certain state, is there any way that you would have any effect over that prison being for profit? Is there a way that you can stop that, as if you're not even, because if you're not even someone who comes from that state?
You can't, the federal government has limited authority over state facilities.
That's my problem.
Absolutely. There are federal prisons, however. So.
Okay, well you can do something about them, but not...
There is a separation of powers between the states and the federal government, no question about it, as there should be.
Well, what do you like to do in your time off?
An easy question. Well, first of all, I haven't had any time off since last October. But when I do have time off, I have, until recently, I had 2 dogs. Now I have 1 dog. My elder dog passed away a couple of months ago. I'm a big dog lover. I love to take them to the park and that kind of thing. When I can get my kids' attention, I love spending time with them. And until this summer, I was a really great organic gardener, and I loved gardening and then cooking meals that came from my garden. I will tell you, I planted my garden in late May, and it turned into nothing but a big garden of weeds this year. So those are the things I most like to do.
Yeah, I just have one more question here. A little while ago, you were talking about that you believe in legal immigration. What are your views on sanctuary cities, and what are your views on whether or not we should abolish ICE?
I do not believe we should abolish ICE. I think that the agency does need some reforms, but I certainly don't think that we should abolish it. Sanctuary cities is a tough question, and I'll tell you why. I come at it from a couple of different perspectives. One is, I was the city solicitor in Allentown, as some of you may know, meaning the chief legal officer in the city of Allentown until last December. And I've seen how stretched municipal budgets are, and police departments and other agencies of municipalities. And I'm concerned about requiring local municipalities to stretch their budget any further to carry out the functions of the federal government. So that's one. The other is, and I don't know this to a certainty, but I know that I have read studies that say that sanctuary cities are actually somewhat safer because immigrants are not afraid to report crimes. I can't speak to that personally, and I think it's worth looking at. But ideally, we would be looking at, I see talk of things like the border wall and sanctuary cities being more of a distraction than a solution. I really think what we have to be looking at is an overhaul of our immigration system.
Okay, we're coming to that tweaking hour. Question.
One last question about actually having to confront conflict in the house when you get down there. I just wanted to know, well, you're gonna be meeting a lot of people, and you're not gonna agree with everyone. And right now, there's almost like a sense of flair, and a lot of times it's actually kind of disturbing, some of the behaviors that I've been watching on C-SPAN. You know, rhetoric, and altogether having to stand up for what you believe in right now and what you know your constituents really need here. How do you feel that what do you project that is going to be some of the tougher things to stand up against, and are you prepared?
Well, I'm prepared. I mean, I'm not exactly a shrinking violet. My training has been otherwise, has taught me to stand up for myself even more than my parents did, and I have a pretty strong backbone. Having said that, my mother always taught me that the loudest voice in the room is not always the one that's heard. And I subscribe to that. I believe in a lot of quiet work, a lot of friendly work. I really think that we need, I don't like the rhetoric and the theatrics that we see. I think it's demeaning, and that what we really need to see is much more dignity and civility. And I believe that I am that way. I would certainly strive to always be dignified and civil to other members of Congress and other people, and certainly to constituents. I think that there's a time and a place to know, just as I said before, that when I have clients in my law office, most of the time we try to work towards a resolution. I know when it's time to fight. I know when we have to go to court, so to speak. But I really believe that most people want to avoid confrontation.
Hi. Circling back around to the prison issue. As it is in our current system, after people have been in prison and then exit after they've served their time for a felony, they still obviously aren't allowed to vote.
Depends on the state.
Exactly. So I was just curious what your position on that is, voter reenfranchisement for ex-prisoners who have already served their time, have already reformed.
Well, that is a state issue.
Right.
And individual states have control over their voting laws unless it were to be incorporated into something like an amended Voting Rights Act. My personal feeling is that people who have served their time have the right to vote. I think that if you can require them to pay taxes, which you can, that you should be able to vote. And so that's where I come from on that. If they are safe enough and entitled to be released into society, they're entitled to become members of society again. And I also think that it's part of the rehabilitation process, that we want these people to be reintegrated into our society and be productive and feel like they're part of things.
I want to start thinking about wrapping it up. I look around and I see maybe 2 or 3 millennials, which would be a concern to me, but they may not be into town hall meetings. Your campaign, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, do you feel you're embracing millennials?
Well, I can tell you that we have, for anybody who's ever been over to our office, our main office at Westgate Mall, everybody on the staff is a whole lot younger than I am. Our volunteers range in age from people who aren't old enough to vote to people who are in their 90s and everything in between. We've spent a lot of time talking to kids on college campuses. We've got events coming up in the primary. I was at various college campuses on multiple occasions, and we've done a lot to engage with the younger generation, because that's really what it's all about. That's why I'm running.
Okay. I just wanted to respond to what you just said, because I think it's a very important question, and it would be very important that we decide as a collective to take that on here.
Together.
To bring young people here, find out what they think about all kinds of things, to let them shape what's happening. I was very happy you said that.
And a town hall meeting may not be their avenue. That's why I'm glad to hear that you have them engaged. One last question that I want to end with something for all of us. On your campaign trail, what is the biggest learning that touches your heart?
The biggest what?
Learning, something that you didn't know before you set out on this campaign. Not the amount of money, but something that touches your heart.
It's individual stories. It's people's individual struggles, some of which I've shared, as with my mother who, died and had to go into hospice care, and others I haven't shared. People of color sharing with me their stories of difficulties in the community. Senior citizens. I guess I'm an AARP member, so I know I'm technically a senior. I don't yet have the benefit of collecting Medicare, but stories from people all over, and mostly what I really care about hearing are problems that they're having. And it ranges from people with a mental health issue in their family to people who have devastating healthcare stories of not taking their full medication as prescribed by the doctor because they can't afford it, people who are having trouble getting their child properly educated. That's what really keeps me going, honestly.
I'd like for Susan to hear two things. One is, what is your number one concern, in a word or two, for this country? But then, what is your number one thing that you lift up about our country that will carry us into the future to help us solve these issues? So first of all, what are your number one real big concerns that you're concerned about this country? Just say, I'll repeat it.
The deplorable state of our education system.
Education system.
Power of corporations over the politicians.
Power of corporations over the politicians.
I agree with you.
Others.
The corruption of the presidential administration and...
One, corruption of the presidential administration.
Climate change.
Climate change.
Global violence.
Wait, what?
Global warming.
Global warming.
Stability of Social Security.
Stability of Social Security. Single payer health care. We got a lot of issues, man. We got a lot of issues. Animosity between the parties. Mental health issues. Mine is, I think we've overemphasized the individual to the community.
Term limits in Congress.
Term limits in Congress. Okay, good.
Erosion of women's rights.
Erosion of women's rights. Mass gun violence.
What I find it hard is that it's in the year 2018, and I still see people having
Prejudice. 2018, still dealing with prejudice.
My mom always had 2 votes on making right, so when I see a prejudice situation, I just won't believe it.
What are some of the things you lift up to say America is able to solve this because? What things we lift up? What? Come together in a crisis.
We're the greatest experiment that ever lived.
Greatest experiment that ever was.
You know, money says in God we trust.
In God we trust.
In God we trust.
Others?
Our love. It's our love.
Love, I say creativity. I think Americans are extremely creative.
Yes, the construction of the Constitution.
The construction, just the Constitution itself.
That's right.
A law and order society.
It's important.
When we look at history, we see how things recycle around. So that's the hope that I have right now, of recycling around.
Okay.
The year of the woman possibly, but things change.
Change, yeah.
Of course, this is a cycle where things can change in this midterm. And I have a lot
The
of...
United States evolves.
Yeah.
I am proud of freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech. Okay.
Millions and millions of talented people.
Yep. Millions and millions of talented people.
Our children.
Children. Great. Thank you all for coming. I do want to give you a final word as we conclude.
Well, I think I've said a lot. I may be all talked out. I just want to thank all of you. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. I want to thank you for caring enough about our system to come and listen to candidates and to really know who you're voting for. Most of all, I want to thank you for voting. I think that, you know, one of the things that gives me hope is that we in this country have the freedom to vote and the freedom to vote our conscience. And I think that that's an incredibly important thing for our country and for us individually. And I just thank you all for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. If you're able to join us for Tim Selfies, the Libertarian, on Wednesday, October 31st, and then Marty Notenstein on October 31st. And then Marty Notenstein is November 1st. That doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Look on our posters. Or the Salkin Source. Thanks for Josh for being here and filming that. Thank you for coming.